In your hands, you hold a brand new copy of the game, Suzerainty. It's snugly wrapped in a skin of plastic. The cover features a charming illustration depicting a mass of grinning laborers loading goods onto a ship, while a richly dressed administrator oversees their work. The exact location and time period are left deliberately vague, but it's clearly meant to represent the economic relationship between the Revacholian suzerainty and its many vassals. The box has a nice heft to it. You hear the rattle of individual wooden tokens and feel their weight shifting back and forth. What treasures wait in store for you? Even before you open it, you can tell that this will be a meaty game of grand strategy and complex player interactions. The plastic wrap rips off as easily as a bodice in a tawdry historical romance. There's a hiss as the lid slides off. Inside, you find a thick, full-color rulebook and more than a dozen pouches of various wooden components. Savor that new board game smell. A mix of wood, paper, and ink, all wrapped in the sweet must of cardboard. Welcome to Suzerainty, a game of economic strategy for the whole family. The rulebook is sumptuously illustrated and thick as a Gradian novel. The colorful illustrations depict cheerful workers picking apricots, hauling marble sculptures out of crumbling temples, and harvesting a strange magenta-leafed plant. Everyone is smiling. You begin to suspect there may be a political agenda to this so-called family game. Only one way to find out. The instructions are opaque at first and introduce many concepts you're not familiar with. Fortunately, there are many diagrams and examples throughout. You soon figure out the basic conceit. Each player represents an administrator for the suzerain of Revachol. Your objective is to increase the suzerain's wealth and renown by accumulating victory points. That's where the suzerain's vassals come in. The game features 4 vassal nations, each one home to an economically important resource. Each turn, the player collects resources from vassals where they've placed workers. They may then rearrange their workers, fulfill contracts for coin and bonuses, or build structures back in Revachol. As you leaf through the pages, your eye catches on a sidebar labeled Advice for Beginners. Remember, there are many paths to victory in Suzerainty, but successful players will find one strategy and commit to it wholeheartedly. Boring, boring, boring. Tear up this rulebook and commit some old-school atrocities. The actual scoring system appears infinitely complex, with a series of tables and appendices required to compute each player's final victory point total. You skip that part for now. You open up a number of pouches containing wooden tokens. There are also several punch boards with other cardboard components that will need to be punched out before you can play. Each cardboard token makes a satisfying tsk as you pop it out. Soon, a neat pile of cardboard coins and counters has accumulated before you.
What? You're not going to offer to let me punch any of them out?
In addition to the worker and building tokens used by each player, there are also several piles of colorful resource tokens, each representing one of the game's 4 principal resources. From the Empire of Safre, orange apricot tokens. From Ilmarat, the ancestral name of Ilmara, gray marble block tokens. From the Semenine Islands, white sacks of sugar tokens. And from Supramuindi and Sarah Maritza, magenta tokens for unprocessed cocaine leaves.
Oh, those are nice.
You hold the open game box before you. The lieutenant looks over the rulebook before he sees something that makes his eyes go wide.
Holy shit. The average playing time for this game is 1 to 6 hours. I'm not sure we can afford to set aside that kind of time for a game.
What is detective work if not an elaborate game? You need logical inference, attention to detail, the ability to analyze your opponent's motives.
I do feel like my thinking has become somewhat rigid. Maybe a little diversion to keep the mind limber is just what's in order.
See? He's doing the hard work himself. All he needed was a little nudge.
Alright, you've convinced me. How do we play?
You explain the basic setup procedures to the lieutenant, who seems to be a quick study. You each take your bag of tokens and counters and unfold the board between you. In the center is the crown of Revachon. Radiating outward are her colorful vessels, each one supplying some raw material desired by the suzerain. Apricots from Safre, archaeological treasures from Ilmarat, sugars from the Seminine Islands, and magenta cocaine from Supra Muindi and Sarah Maritza. There's also a neat little log to keep track of your progress in case you need to put the game away and return to it later. The lieutenant goes first. He draws a contract card and moves several of his workers to the Safre territory of the board and the others to the Seminine Islands.
Alright, detective, your turn.
You have a few options available to you. Will you try to fulfill contracts right away or rearrange your workers to maximize production on future turns? Remember what the rulebook said. You will want to choose a strategy early on and stay committed to it. You draw a contract card offering a number of coins in exchange for archaeological treasures. You place all your workers on the Ilmarat territory. On your next turn, you produce 6 units of archaeological treasure and fulfill the contract for a handful of coins.
Not bad, detective.
But not good enough, the lieutenant seems to be saying. As he completes his own contract card, the lieutenant is rewarded with 4 coins and a round wooden token that he places in the center of the board.
That's a market. It's worth 2 victory points. Don't worry, it was mostly just luck. You'll earn some points soon enough.
What is that patronizing tone? You're one of the suzerain's trusted administrators. You may need to put the lieutenant in his place.
Points are nothing. They don't exist. They're just an arbitrary convention that games use to reward or punish players for certain behaviors.
If points are really arbitrary, as the lieutenant says, what's to stop you from playing the game the way you want?
There are some paranoid types who believe the moral intern keeps detailed score sheets for everyone in the Real Belt. But that's obviously nonsense. Otherwise, no. There are no points, just your actions and the consequences of those actions.
Just like there are no honor points, none whatsoever.
That's just the way it is. Now, I believe it's your turn.
Glancing over the board, you see several possible strategies. Pressing more workers into service would increase your economic output and help you to survive a possible conflict with the lieutenant. Or you could ignore your labor supply and focus on fulfilling contracts for points and resources. Those aren't your only options. You could also show your workers how much you appreciate them by investing some of that wealth in them. After all, they're the ones producing wealth for the suzerain. Well, sure, you can do that. It's just not a terribly effective strategy, but then it's up to you.
That's up to you, detective. But remember, the objective of the game is to earn victory points for the suzerain. You should probably pick one strategy and stick to it. Trying to do a little of everything is usually a bad idea. The workers are just there to produce raw resources. You're not supposed to worry about them too much.
The lieutenant assumes you're playing by the rules as written. But what's the point of playing if you can't make your own choices?
That's up to you, detective. You should probably pick one strategy and stick to it. Because the way you earn points is by pleasing the suzerain. And the player with the most points wins the game.
The lieutenant assumes you're playing by the rules as written. Who cares about workers or territories when the real action is in Revachon? You spend your turns fulfilling contracts for sweet coins and one-time bonuses. After several turns, you have a neat pile of cardboard coins and several units of archaeological treasure, which you trade in to build a museum. You place a cylindrical piece of wood on the Revachol section in the middle of the board. It's meant to stand in for a beautifully adorned edifice filled with ancient wonders. This is more or less what happened in real life as well. To this day, if Ilmarans want to see their nation's priceless treasures, they have to visit Revachol, or Gottwald, or Sur-le-Clay.
Well played, detective. That museum is worth 3 victory points.
Now it's the lieutenant's turn to respond. He moves aggressively onto the Safrey territory. Soon, his workers are producing a steady supply of extremely valuable apricots. How can you let the lieutenant dominate you like that? You need to hit back, and hard. For several turns, you struggle to respond to the lieutenant's burgeoning apricot empire. Eventually, you relocate the majority of your workers to Supremawindi and Saramaritsa, where they begin producing a bumper crop of cocaine tokens. You draw a new contract card. According to the text, there's an aristocrat willing to trade a large supply of cocaine for a number of coins and access to a rare bonus. Amplified music worth 7 victory points. You know, this isn't unlike the situation the historical Revacholian Suzerainty faced in Safrey in the middle of the last century. Well, the Suzerain was looking for new markets for all the cocaine it was producing, and it settled on Safrey. By introducing cocaine into Safrey under exclusive contract, the Suzerain created an extremely valuable captive market for an extremely addictive product. If you could somehow get the lieutenant's workers addicted to your cocaine, you could not only make them less productive, you would also force the lieutenant to pay you for your cocaine tokens each turn. Yes, you can. It's right there in the rules. Now's your chance. Show the lieutenant what happens when he patronizes you. You've reached a critical strategic juncture. How do you respond to the lieutenant's aggression? It takes several turns, but you slowly begin accumulating the cocaine necessary to complete the contract. When you do, it practically rains cardboard coins on your side. Despite your trash talking, the lieutenant still has a formidable store of coins and resources. The end game is upon you. How will you spend the vast resources you've acquired for the glory of the Suzerain? Flipping through the manual, you find the most expensive structure in the game, the Revacholian victory column, worth 12 victory points. If you can successfully build it, victory would be all but assured. Alternatively, you could try launching a trade war to crush the lieutenant's economy, or you could blow all that money on a public education system for your worker tokens. The choice is yours. Using the substantial coins and resources you've accumulated from diligently fulfilling contracts and constructing trade routes, you spend your final turns constructing the ultimate structure in the game, the Revacholian victory column. With a triumphant flourish, you remove a rectangular token from one of the satchels and place it next to your museum cylinder in the center of the board.
They're nice tokens, yes. Very impressive. Now, let's tally up the scores, shall we?
Computing the final scores is almost a game unto itself. You each spend an inordinate amount of time making stacks of coins, consulting tables, and struggling with basic addition and multiplication. After double, then triple checking your maths, you have your final score. 35 victory points. The Suzerain will be extremely pleased.
I've got 26 points. Looks like you won convincingly. Well played, detective. Now let's clean up and get back to work.
You hold the open game box before you. Motorway south. lone vector stretches in your mind's eye into the wild pale yonder, for an unimaginable distance, forgetting, until you can no longer remember anything. No cities, no mountains, no oceans, and finally, no vector. Nothing remains. A blank space with no point of reference, where only one type of motion is possible. The motion of a human throat, swallowing, and then it comes to you. To reach the end of the motorway south is to be unborn. You've had this thought before, while aimlessly wandering the streets of Jamrock. A lost piece of the man you were. A dark hope